So you've got connectivity. What can you do with it now? Right. And 5G to me is not a destination, it's a critical enabler.
And you're just simply not going to be the leader in the next 10, 20, 50, whatever years if you're not the leader in how well you use data.
Ocient will really thrive in a world that has petabytes and exabytes worth of data being ingested in real time. You guys are a bad influence, but I like it.
That's a good opening line. You guys are a bad influence. Perfect. Hello, I'm Chris Gladwin, the CEO of Ocient, which is the hyperscale data analytics solution company. And I'd like to welcome you to our second edition of Big Bytes with Ocient, where we grab a bite or a drink and learn from partners, customers, and some of the brightest minds thinking about the world's largest data sets. And today I'm excited to be joined by Jim Brisimitzis, who is founder and general partner at the 5G Innovation Lab. Jim, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, my name is Jim Brisimitzis. I'm the founder of the 5G Open Innovation Lab. We're an open innovation program. We're backed by leading enterprise platform providers and leading enterprise solution providers like VMware and Microsoft and Dell and Accenture, and the list goes on, 14 of them. So thanks again for inviting me on today's episode.
First off, what are you drinking today?
I do want to preface that it is 2 p.m. my time today, but it's 5 o'clock where you're at, so this qualifies for the drink that I'm having, which is from Rogue here in the West Coast. It's a hazelnut brown nectar. I'm a porter guy, so dark beers are my favorite. This one fits the bill.
Awesome. Well, it's 4 o'clock here. I'm in Chicago.
Chicago is my kind of town.
But it is 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
And I'm drinking a Jumai Daiginju, which is basically just good sake. I like it partly because it comes in a small bottle and I only even drink half of it half the time, most of the time. And it keeps, so you can have it a week later and it's still good. Or a month later, even. It lasts forever.
Forever, 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 ever, forever, ever.
5G is so significant that 5G is the largest expense in human history. It seems like if you add it all up, the telcos are going to spend something like $3 to $4 trillion for 5G.
Globally, that's correct. On the technology side, when you think of the CSPs and what they're building, that's absolutely correct, Chris. There is a small but growing faction of enterprises who are exploring private 5G as well. Today, private 4G LTE. And so when you start throwing those numbers in, I can see how the number, blows up. But if you wanted to look at current comparisons, there was some research that I looked into a little while back. So the numbers are dated. Here in the US, the big three, not including Dish, but the big three CSPs are anticipated to spend somewhere around $330 billion over the course of 5G's life cycle. Typically, these new generations will run in market for about 10 to 15 years, right? The 4G LTE service here in the United States and around the world really didn't take hold until late 2006 and 2007, right? So it's got a long investment cycle. So that's about $330 billion is what I've read. If you want to put that into comparison, I also read from some research that the big three hyperscalers, Google, Microsoft, and Amazon, it's primarily Amazon and Microsoft, Google's catching up, but those three globally to build their cloud services have reportedly spent north of $350 billion. So if you just look at what the US carriers are expected to spend, and again, that's not including Dish, that number will grow significantly as well. But when you put that contrast and comparison in place, you'll see that there is a pretty significant investment. Now, the big question is, if I'm a CSP today, how am I going to monetize it beyond SIM cards and smartphones? Like, what is the monetization opportunity? So they're exploring everything from private 5G instances and managing those. IoT is a big area. We've looked at it from a software perspective and building out that software ecosystem, which is one of the reasons why we were so privileged to work with Ocient as part of one of our batches recently, because that is where we think the bigger opportunity for 5G is, not just in connectivity, but what you can do with those networks. And in certain use cases where you have high velocity workloads, like let's say a pretty busy manufacturing facility or a warehouse where you're just moving a lot of things, creating a lot of data, need to make decisions on stuff in milliseconds.
Yeah, one of the things that everyone thinks is so easy in hindsight, but is, having had the smartest minds think about this forever and not be so good at it, is knowing exactly what's going to happen when these enabling new capabilities occur. It seems so obvious that if we had a high-speed internet, we could do search. But it wasn't that obvious. And I suspect as part of what you're dealing with at the 5G Innovation Lab is like, this giant step function is happening. It's going to be 10 times or 100 times the bandwidth.
Now think about in your world, Chris, with 25 plus billion IoT devices creating data. That's massive amounts of new data that's going to tap new efficiencies that enterprise don't see today because they don't have access to that data. And more importantly, they can't query it in real time. But I've often said that data is the new oil.
I have said the same thing recently, that data is the new oil.
Thank the maker. This oil bath is going to feel so good.
And you're just simply not going to be the leader in the next 10, 20, 50, whatever years if you're not the leader in how well you use data.
So you've got connectivity. What can you do with it now? Right. And 5G to me is not a destination, it's a critical enabler. And data is where I think you're spot on. The data, I think, is where that value really gets unlocked. But now we're working in a world where in 2010, I think there was 2 zettabytes of data created annually. And in 2025, it's anticipated that we'll get to 181 zettabytes. Right. And so now it's not even about storing it. It's about making sense of this stuff real time, right? Not like running batch workloads overnight and coming back in the morning and figuring out what the data tells you. That's where I think you guys are really, really well positioned in that world, and doing it cost effectively, of course.
A big part of what you do is you learn about a lot of these new companies and ideas, and then select the ones that you're going to work with, and really help them out. But I wonder what your perception is. Is it, you feel like there's just tons and tons of these ideas and companies coming forward with 5G ideas, 5G enabled ideas, and you just have to sift through this giant mountain, and that's a lot of it? Or there's really not that many? I mean, even though, it's like this future $10 trillion market that's in this 5G ecosystem, it's still new enough and different enough that there's not really that many people working on these ideas. Where do you think, what's your perception? Are you just like overwhelmed with possible ideas, or is it smaller than it probably should be in terms of the new ideas that you see, new companies in this domain?
Yeah, it's more the former, and because we're really we're leaning towards enterprise-based startups who happen to see a differentiation for their products or services being furthered through connectivity and computing. So we focus on sort of the disruptive enterprise-based startups that are creating, new use cases for, name your thing, in your world, big data. But we've had other teams that are doing stuff in healthcare and other industries. So that's sort of the first one. The bigger issue that we have is, we have 14 active partners today, hopefully an additional 3 to 4 that we'll be announcing shortly. And those partners all have sort of their priorities as well. So now we have to kind of map priorities to partnerships because, as you've experienced, the best part of our program is aligning incentives between our startups and our partners and really setting up these relationships that pay dividends in the future. So that's sort of the biggest thing. One of the areas that we struggled with is we call it the 5G Open Innovation Lab, and many enterprise startups like yourselves maybe don't assimilate to, like, we're not a 5G company, we're not building radios, we're not doing connectivity stuff. But in reality, Ocient will really thrive in a world that has petabytes and exabytes worth of data being ingested in real time, right? And all of that stuff gets connected, Chris, as you know, all of it does. So one of the struggles that we have is, how do we think about our branding going forward? Because we're focused on the opportunity and connectivity and computing on the edge, but it's not, the branding can't keep us hostage to just this 5G thing, because it's so much bigger, than that as well. My understanding from all the conversations that I've been in and the research that I've done is in 1G, 2G, 3G, 4G, to an extent, what you were dealing with was monolithic architectures, right? So if I'm a CSP, I'm going to go buy, this NEPS equipment or this NEPS equipment, or maybe multiple NEPS equipment, and stitch stuff together. But more or less, those were fixed purpose monolithic systems. In 5G, you move to open architectures, right? So you can mix and match. You run things as a service, and more importantly, you're deploying applications like network slicing and beamforming and dynamic spectrum sharing, and all this other stuff. You're deploying those as applications. You're also generating a ton of insight from the network itself as well. So that's the big change in my world. If you look not too far ago, right back to the early days of 2007 when AWS was just getting off the ground as a service from Amazon. What was known then is fairly known now. What you're essentially doing is creating a platform for software developers to go create new experiences. And what 5G is the marriage of basically compute and networking as a singular platform service that people can go create new experiences on the far edge where the hyperscalers, today reach, but now you've got this ability to locate compute and connectivity in solid ways. It just unlocks a whole new, era of ideas, stuff that we can predict today. Because if you look back in the cloud era, it's pretty easy now to spot some trends that are coming up. But more importantly, with platforms, as long as you're providing services, the most innovative folks will start building some really cool things that we didn't think was possible. That's what we're trying to unlock, is that opportunity. And for the carriers, as I mentioned earlier, this is the time to change course and look at what more can your networks do beyond just dial tone. I'm not trying to diminish the importance of dial tone. It is important. But there's a moment that, Jeff Bezos looked at, and likewise Microsoft has and other big players have, that are inflection points in their journey. This is that such inflection point. The 5G Open Innovation Lab program was not designed to just be a place for carriers to go geek out with startups. It was a way to help try to create a means for narrowing this digital chasm, right? Or this chasm. If you read Clayton Christensen's Innovator's Dilemma,
I mean, I've read it like 3 times, by the way. Yeah.
and every time you read it, Clayton reminds everyone, hey, these leaders, these carrier providers and leaders, they're making all the right decisions based on the data they have today. What ends up happening is the market evolves around them, right? So then the question that I had in my mind in designing the program was, well, how do you take some of that guesswork out? Well, the best way to do it is to narrow the chasm. And by doing that, you expose CSPs and the ecosystem to itself, right? So if I'm a CSP today and I'm kind of curious about where software is going and what enterprise use cases really matter, well, by being part of the program, you get not only exposed to leading startups like Ocient that are doing some really cool things, and you can work with them on your time and get your experiences. The other thing I did was I wanted to surround the industry with the platform players, the ones that really, really matter in the world. So that's where you have Microsoft and Intel and Spire and Ericsson and Nokia and VMware and Dell, and you bring all of those players together. So again, in this spirit of narrowing the chasm, as a CSP, I get exposure to innovative startups doing really cool things across all stages, early to later stage. That's great. But I'm also in a forum where I'm having conversations and interacting and basically playing alongside some of the largest platform, influencers in the world, right? These big workloads run on Microsoft, big workloads run on VMware, and they're equally as interested in, figuring out how the CSPs are looking at this opportunity as well. So we wanted to create an open innovation program that brought the best of innovation, the best of platforms, and now industry together to coalesce on what is going to be a huge opportunity in the 5G world. And for CSPs that are part of the program, they get a chance to do that experimentation in the market rather than, sit behind a whiteboard and guess their way through things. You don't have to guess. You can just be part of this ecosystem.
It seems like you're driven by, I don't know, some kind of passion that makes you want to work so hard at something that's so difficult. Why are you doing this?
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. My wife asked me that the other day too. Well, how do I do this? So I've been in the software industry for 22 years. I've really enjoyed it. And if you look across, the Microsofts and Intels and those, and then you look across your atypical big enterprise like a Ford or a General Motors or a Toyota, or name your favorite enterprise in any other industry, the folks that I grew up with, they understand the software ecosystem, they build the platforms, they engage the developers, they understand that world. The folks that aren't necessarily in that world, in classic enterprise, right, that are developing cars and furniture and clothing and stuff, they all know that their businesses are going to get to and be evolved by software. They all know. So then how do you connect into that ecosystem, right? And so some have set up outposts in big startup hubs like Silicon Valley or Boston or New York or others, and kind of hope and pray that they could do that. But when I started the Microsoft for Startups program, Chris, one of the biggest lessons that I learned was, despite how great your flag was, and in my case, it was Microsoft, right? some of the best founders like yourself and others, right? They're like, yeah, that's great, but I'm also doing stuff with this company, or I need to go interact with that company, and so on and so forth. So my aha moment in running Microsoft for startups was that to really truly help founders and in turn create a really valuable network that you can then build into the enterprise to help those founders, you got to wear multiple flags. Like, you just got to bring in this more open innovation concept. So that was the essence of doing it. What drives me? We help people. We really do, right? And we're part of, even in a small way, with even Ocient, right? We are part of your journey in some little way, and that really helps. And ultimately, at some point, there'll be an enterprise partner that we work with that's going to be building on top of Ocient, and that that drives me. It makes me feel really good. Now, on the economic side, yeah, we're sponsored by our partners to run this. We're setting up in the process of setting up a sidecar fund. So post program, we would love to invest in the teams that we help engage. So there is an economic angle to this down the road. But if we can provide this engagement for enterprises and industries that are not classically lined into the software ecosystem, but realize that software ecosystem is going to be a transformative force in their business and industries longer term, that's that gap I want to fill. That's a world that I know I could be really helpful in.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is you're passionate about the impact.
I spend a lot of time with the founders before we put them in front of our partners. Yeah, I'm not looking for cowboys or cowgirls. Right, people that just think they're the hottest shit since whatever, and they might be, and they might have the best, the best product or the best upside, but we're working with a set of partners that are committing a lot of resources and their time. I can open up a door that's really transformative to any one of the teams that we engage in, and that level of trust is not something you can just create overnight. So we'll walk away from teams that that have a certain bravado to themselves, because I don't know if I can be helpful for them. If they're going to carry that bravado with me, they're likely to carry that with their partners. And frankly, we've had teams, Chris, like yours, that are pretty senior along. They've raised a lot of cash. So someone that has a ton of bravado, I respect it because of what they've done or built. But if you really want to get ahead in this industry, relationships absolutely matter. And if you're going to bring in somebody that's going to throw some weight around and really not be able to back it up, from my standpoint, I don't think it's something our partners appreciate. So we look at that definitely, but we also look for founders that are really solving super tough problems where we know our partners will get excited. They will get excited as well. And it's those folks that, that we get excited about bringing in and helping.
Yeah. And I've learned that too. Like, one of the things I like about like what we do at the way we work at Ocient, the way we worked at CleverSafe and other places, like we get to know customers, like, they're like business friends and sometimes real friends too. But like, I care about their outcome. And it's not just like, oh, I got the order. I mean, I personally will feel like super proud, if we can help them be successful. And, and look, particularly when you get into the land of hyperscale stuff, like if you enter a vertical market like telcos, they all know each other. Like, the back end system for a telco that's doing, performance optimization, that's not a competitive thing. And so all the telcos, they talk to each other all the time. Like, hey, what database did you use and how did it work out? I mean, they're going to talk. So if you go in there and you like screw it up, they're all going to, you're in trouble. It's going to be hard to recover in that vertical. If you go in there and you rock their world, you're done with sales and marketing because they'll do it for you. They'll just let everyone know. And, you're going to get these calls, which are wonderful to get. Like, hey, I just talked to somebody over here and, I'm really thinking I should, check out what you're doing because it sounds really amazing. That's the whole playbook, and it's all relationship based. And the other thing, you're going to find no matter, I mean, if you're really doing something innovative, it's not always going to work. And, one of the things we used to say at CleverSafe is when there's a problem, it's an opportunity to show the customer how good you are, because they all know like stuff's going to happen. How well you respond, like that's really where you show your quality.
That's how you do it. And it's a big world, Chris, but it's a small world as well, right? So the way you are gets around pretty quickly. Certainly in communities like Silicon Valley or other startup hubs. So yeah, I find that that being on the right side of humility and being on the right side of caring for people and helping them along to the best of your ability is always the long term. It's always the right path.
Well, that's fantastic, Jim. Thanks again for spending time with us today.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks to all of you for listening, wherever you may be. So it was really a pleasure. And don't forget to visit Ocient.com if you want any more information about what we do. So thanks again, everybody, and look forward to next time.